This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Did you guys catch that? That new piece of information in the intro right then? Okay, first off, hello to everybody old and new. If this is your first time listening or if you've caught every episode, there's no better time to be a part of this podcast than right now. And I mean that. I'll explain that in a second, not just saying it. This is the start of season 4. Thanks for waiting patiently while things happen behind the scenes to get us here. What you're listening to right now is episode 0, which I always begin a new season with. This is episode 0 of the new season, and simultaneously, I've released episode 1 as well, with our first guest, this time out, Ed Cooney, who I think some of you maybe already know. He's been a contributor to Tourette'sPodcast.com, and it's just a really fun conversation. He has a blog, very active on Twitter. But let's talk about what's been happening recently. You might have caught this on social media, or like I said, maybe you heard something new in the intro to this episode. The big news, and this is brand new for Tourette's Podcast, is that it's now made possible with support from the Tourette Association of America. Again, Tourette's Podcast is now made possible with support from the Tourette Association of America. They saw the podcast growing. I needed additional resources to help keep up with the growth. Together, we wanted the show to be around for people. The show gets some support already from some champion listeners through Patreon, but with the Tourette Association coming aboard as the primary sponsor, I mean, we're fueled and will continue growing, and it's been really refreshing to work with TAA. Amanda and Megan and Diana and Susan and Leo and others on the TAA team, some of whom I got to meet in person recently in Minneapolis. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But working with them has been really cool, and I'll point out again that they're expanding their focus on support for adults with TS, which is fantastic. But what's this mean for the content of this podcast? I did this when we joined the Geeks Rising Network, and I'm doing it again with the Tourette Association, now part of the show. Just to ask the question, does this mean the TAA is coming in and making all kinds of changes and telling me what my agenda is and what I can and can't do? No, I mean, nothing like that. You guys have said you like the show for what it is. Each episode, my name is Ben, I have Tourette syndrome. Each episode, I talk with another Touretteer about his, her, or their life to see what kinds of amazing stories and really odd commonalities we can find. People who have TS can relate to the conversation, often in jaw-dropping ways, and people who don't have TS will get a perspective on it that I can almost guarantee is different than what you've gotten before. And you might also see, and I've heard this from a couple people, that it's an analogy. TS is an analogy for what you may have little to no control over in your life and how that influences how you live. And I guess finding that relatability, we can all have a new kind of conversation that's not awkward or saddled with stereotypes. And I mean, the Tourette Association is being just totally awesome and supportive and inclusive, and they want their communications and advocacy to be as full and far-reaching as can be. And I'm happy that the Tourette's Podcast is now part of that plan. And yeah, even though it's the Tourette Association of America, that does not impact the global focus that we have here. We're still hearing from people in Canada, Europe, Australia. I really want to break into Asia and Africa more. And of course, we have guests from the United States. We will have voices from the Tourette Association of America on the show as things happen, but we're also, conversational partners, I guess you could say, with Tourette Canada and Tourette's Action in the UK and the folks in Australia. And I mean, things are still very global. I'll point out recently, one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me. Here I have to give a big shout out to Esther in the UK. She's a race car driver who recently competed with the Tourette's Podcast logo on her race car. It's just so awesome to see. I need to put those photos up on Tourette'sPodcast.com. I'll do that. But just really cool to see. And I'm just happy TAA digs that kind of momentum and connection and wants to not only keep that going, but lend help as well. So yeah, the Tourette Association of America, primary sponsor of Tourette's Podcast. And you'll hear a mid-roll commercial for them with good info too. But okay, let's hear from you.
Hey Ben, this is Destry. I just recently had a thought in my head just pop up. It's late at night. I've been listening to your podcast, starting from, I'm currently on the 2nd season, so I'm not super up to date currently, but I was wondering if anybody has ever had this tic. And it's going to be really hard to explain. It's a little bit convoluted, and it doesn't really sound like a tic, but I'm confident that this was for me. When I first started getting tics, I would associate colors to numbers. And I know this is a type of synesthesia, but I don't have this anymore. So this is how I've come to realize that this was probably a tic. So, for example, number 7 was green, number 2, red, 3, orange, 4, purple, 5, blue, 6, yellow, etc. As soon as it got up to double digits, the color association wasn't really part of it. But I would the colors that were strongest to the numbers were numbers that I ticked constantly. So it was the number 7, which is my favorite number. Due to this, that's green. But that had such a strong sense of green. And I don't know. I was just wondering if anybody else had this. I know it's not super... I wouldn't think that it would be super common. And I don't even know... Like, that would be so strange to just have synesthesia for a couple of months. So I figure this has got to be a tic. It's got to be one of those mental things surrounding my tics and Tourette's, especially since I ticked those numbers.
Thank you, Destry. He obviously sent his question in audio format, which I love. I mean, bring that on. If you have a question for the show, you can record it on your smartphone and send that in to tourettespodcast@gmail.com. That goes straight to me. Of course, you can send questions any way you want, written out, voice recording, however. I love getting your questions. Shout out to Ryan. I got your email and haven't written back yet. I'm really sorry. That's coming though, I promise. So to Destry's question, I know we talked about it. Well, I threw out the word synesthesia a while back, kind of exploratorily, if that's a word. I mentioned that I feel a pain when I see or hear about certain kinds of injuries or sources of pain in other people. But I also do this thing, and somehow I have a feeling that this is kind of common. It's probably common, but where I ascribe different feelings or intensities to numbers. Like the number 8 is really abrasive to me. And the number 6 is really free and progressive or something. And I can't explain it, but this might be a common thing that we do, but it doesn't come off tic-like for me. And I really want to know if other people can relate to Destry here. Again, tourettespodcast@gmail.com or @Tourette'sPod on Twitter. You can also take it to the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook. Shout out to Sophia in the UK. She's our amazing admin who keeps the discussion group in order. Tell her thank you, please. Let's have a conversation with Destry about this. Same contact points for feedback to this question from Lee. She writes, "What's the weirdest tic you've ever had?" And so I don't know if this is the weirdest, but I always just kind of felt stupid doing it. I don't know. I would sort of throw my body. I did this mostly when I was younger, but I would sort of throw my body into this really weird kind of shiver that would start in the center of my back, and then it would kind of like ripple out through my hands, like through my body. More my right arm than my left. And I think to anyone looking, it looks like I'm doing some like rapturous Dancing with the Stars kind of move. So speaking of shivering, I mentioned Sophia at the discussion group. She posed a question there that I want to throw out here. She wrote at the time, "It's 33 degrees Celsius, or about 91 degrees Fahrenheit here in the UK. Does the weather affect your tics?" So that's a question Sophia put out there, and it's a mix of answers from different people, but this does happen to me. I really don't like prolonged exposure or difficult walks in the snow. And I mean, I guess most people don't, but what happens to me is when I get cold, the natural shivers and like teeth chattering that I get end up turning into this over-the-top jitterbug kind of thing. And it kills my lower back because I have a tic where I tense various muscles or strain or tense certain parts of my body. And my back, especially my lower back, is one of them. So these shivering fits really do hurt a bit eventually. And again, what I'm describing is beyond the natural shivering or tensing that I might be doing. And the other tic that the cold really brings out is my arrhythmic breathing tic. And this is just something about, I don't know, there's something about breathing cold or icy air that causes this tic to come out. And when it's bad, and it usually is, it turns into this asthmatic situation. So if I'm just breathing very irregularly, like I'll do a regular exhale, then add these really sudden kind of violent exhales on the tail end of it, it really flares up my asthma and I have to break out my inhaler to recover. It's directly related to the cold. Doesn't happen all the time, but it happens. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you have any odd tics that seem to be influenced by temperature, I have a number of other questions from you here as well, but a lot of them are really angled at medicine and science and other things that are beyond my qualifications. But that's what makes these partnerships and sponsorships so great, is that, we have direct access to answers from experts. And so we'll have an episode where we go through some of those questions. Speaking of experts, I mentioned going to Minneapolis, and there's a post about this on tourettespodcast.com too. But I flew out to the Treating Tourette Together Summit in Minneapolis this past August. Beautiful time of year, beautiful city. And it was a gathering of Tourette patients, providers, and researchers. So we got the Tourette medical community, the Tourette science community, and the Tourette lived experience community all in one place. Diversity of ages and backgrounds, by the way, too. But all in one place to talk about the most sensible ways to make the science and medicine as helpful as it can be and kind of align with the Tourette community, treating Tourette together. There's going to be more specifics about this in the near future, and I really want to get you guys excited about it because hopefully we can make things like comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics, otherwise known as CBIT, a drug-free way of reducing tics that's shown a degree of hope for people, making things like that more accessible to Touretters who need it or want to give it a try. So that was kind of one of the focuses of this summit, or at least one of the discussions, and I got to moderate a couple Q&A sessions, which was a lot of fun, but more importantly, I got to meet people I've been talking to since this podcast started, via email, social media, that kind of thing, but meeting them in person, including Amanda Talty and others from the Tourette Association, and also Drs. Christine Canalia and Matthew Capriati, who have been huge help to Tourette's podcast in terms of science fact-checking and so on. Shout out to Elia, who I spent a lot of time with, Maggie, and I got to hang out with Tourette's Cop. It was a totally unplanned, impromptu thing. A lot of you know Tourette's Cop from social media, police officer with Tourette syndrome. We'll definitely hear from him this season. The best thing about him is he says he doesn't have any interesting stories from the job. Meanwhile, he has a million amazing stories from working as a cop. But when we met up in Minneapolis, it was his first time meeting somebody with TS. And that was really heavy. It was great. Anyway, got him coming up this season, excited about that, and a whole lot more. So many more things to announce in the near future to make you happy if you're a friend or supporter of the Tourette's Podcast, online at tourettespodcast.com, where you'll be able to find every weekly episode this season and all past. This season will carry us through 2019, by the way. There's always more to say and more to get to, but I want to keep this from becoming an audiobook and just let you get on to season 1 of episode 4 with Ed, our first guest, who's really smart, really funny. We cover some great Tourette territory. All right, keep the conversation going at the Tourette's Podcast discussion group. Glad you're here for season 4. Talk to you again soon. You've been listening to Tourette's Podcast, made possible by the Tourette Association of America and supporters like you. Tourette's Podcast is part of the Geeks Rising Network, amazing podcasts over at geeksrising.com. Lots coming up, if I haven't said that already. All right, moving on. This is Ben.